Nelson Crossing, LLC, Z-2018-09, site plan and variance application for the construction of a multifamily residential building located at 147 Nelson Street, Block 5, Lot 6-01, zoning district R-6.
Is there any member of the board that has a conflict with this application? Seeing none. Go ahead.
Thank you. Members of the board, Thomas F. Kelso on behalf of the applicant, Nielsen Crossings, LLC. We're very pleased to be before you this evening for the application that's before you to convert the fire-damaged Polyzetic synagogue that I think all of you are very familiar with. I've been New Brunswick residents for a number of years. As you know, the synagogue has been substantially damaged approximately 3+ years ago and has since been not used for any purpose. However, I think fortunately for everyone, much of the facade of the synagogue has survived. And I know that my witnesses will provide some detail of that for you. But because of the survival of what is really very important parts of the synagogue facade, there is an opportunity to be able to take the synagogue and convert it into an adaptive reuse, which in this case we're proposing a mid-rise apartment building. My client is the contract purchaser of the property, which is subject, of course, to approvals, should the board see fit to grant those approvals. I know that there are representatives of the synagogue here this evening and members of the synagogue themselves, plus my client. I would like to introduce my client, Mr. Dave Adams, and his family, who is the principal of Nielsen Crossings, and obviously an interested party in what the board does this evening. The application primarily is one for a use variance. The application requires a use variance because the application, the zone itself permits a low-rise apartment building. This is categorized as a mid-rise apartment building, the difference being one floor. However, I would point out to you that because of the nature of the facade and what's being preserved, the building that's being proposed as the modifications and reuse is the same height as the existing synagogue. So even though a use variance is necessary because it's characterized as a mid-rise, the building itself isn't any taller than what's there today. There are also a series of additional variances, some that we characterize as bulk, some that are characterized as non-bulk. However, all of these variances, and what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to list them for the record so we understand them. Every single one of these variances is an existing condition. Several I would say. One is actually being reduced, one is actually being increased slightly, but they're all existing conditions. So for the record, I want to list them for you. There's a lot area variance because of 6,871 square feet, whereas a minimum of 43,650 square feet is required. Again, the lot is an existing condition, so the size of that lot is not changing. A lot width of 74.79 feet, whereas a minimum of 200 feet is required. Once again, the lot's not changing, and that's an existing condition. A lot depth of 91.56 feet, whereas a minimum of 200 feet is required. Once again, existing condition, the lot is not changing. There's a front yard setback of 14.2 feet, whereas a minimum of 50 feet is required. Again, we're not changing the front of the building at all, and therefore that is an existing condition. There is a one side yard setback of 0.8 feet proposed, whereas a minimum of 50 feet is required. Again, because the existing facade and building structure is still there, that is an existing condition, it's not changing. A total side yard setback of 2.6 feet, whereas a minimum of 100 feet is required, existing condition, all generated by the fact that the lot's not changing and the building is not changing. A building coverage of 57.9%, whereas 25% is permitted. This is actually, it's an existing condition, but it's actually being reduced because the current amount is 61.6 feet, but because the shed, that stucco shed that's identified on the side, is being eliminated. So there's actually a reduction in building coverage. An impervious coverage of 87.22%, whereas 60% is permitted. This is a slight increase of impervious coverage. The existing impervious is 81.85, so in effect, we're going from 81.85 to 87.22% of impervious coverage. There is a rear yard setback of 0, whereas 50 is required. Again, it's an existing condition because of the existing building remaining. A building height of 46.31 feet, whereas a height of 35 feet is permitted, but that's the exact height that exists today for the synagogue structure that's remaining. So that is not changing, it's an existing condition. We are requesting a parking variance to permit no parking spaces, whereas a minimum of 23 spaces are required. However, it's an existing condition. There's no parking there today. There was no parking there for the existing use when the synagogue was active. So it's an existing variance. We are proposing, because there's no ability to create parking, however, our testimony will provide to you that we have secured a commitment from the parking authority for 23 spaces in the Church Street garage, which, as you know, is down the street and around the corner. So we are providing the parking necessary through that means. I know the board has seen that issue previously. And finally, a floor area ratio of 1.89 to 1, whereas what's permitted is 0.3 to 1. Again, it's an existing condition. The exact amount of floor area ratio that existed previously is unknown because the building itself was gutted, so we couldn't calculate the floor area, but it was clearly more than 0.3 to 1, and probably is a little bit less than what we're proposing today. So that would be a slight increase. But there is an existing, or was an existing floor area ratio before the fire. So overall, the application before the board for preliminary and site plan approval we propose to you is a significant adaptive reuse of the main facade of this building and bringing the building back into utility while maintaining the what really is the most important component, at least architecturally, of what ultimately was really the charm of the synagogue. And I'm not talking about the use and what occurred in the synagogue, but for the building itself. So I'm excited to be before you this evening to present it to you. We think that it really is going to finally, after this number of years, to be able to take this historic facade and bring it back into utility for a use that is compatible with the neighborhood. Obviously, residential is permitted. Residential in mid-rise is not, but we're not changing that height. And so we think it's an appropriate utilization of this property. For you this evening, I'm going to present 4 witnesses. I will present our, as I typically do for you, our engineer to provide the civil engineering aspects of the application. I will present our architect who can provide the architectural components of what's being proposed for you. I also am presenting our traffic consultant who can provide testimony associated with what the expectation is with respect to the generation of pedestrian traffic, the availability of transportation in the area since there is no parking being provided. And finally, we will present, as we need to, professional planning testimony to support the variances that we are requesting of you this evening. That's an overview of the application. Unless the board has any questions for me, I would proceed to call our first witness.
If everyone in the audience could please turn their cell phones off and put them to vibrate, because we have to record this and we keep hearing the noise coming up. Thank you. Go ahead.
At this time, I would call Mr. Frank Farrell for testimony.
Good evening. Please raise your right hand, state your name.
Frank Farrell.
Spell your last name.
Absolutely. Farrell.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Mr. Farrell, you are a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Jersey, is that correct?
That's correct.
And in that capacity, you're familiar with the engineering components of the site plan that's being proposed this evening with this reuse of the synagogue building?
I am.
If you,
Mr. Farrell, have you testified before this board before?
Not before this board, no.
could you then give the board the benefit of your professional qualifications and experience?
Sure. So, for the past 9 years, I've been practicing civil engineering, planning, design, and construction. I graduated from Rowan University in 2009 with a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering. I was licensed in 2014 as a professional engineer. In 2016, I received my certified municipal engineer's certification. And in that 9 years, I've spent all of it at Grotto, and most of it working on projects exactly like this. There's probably been about a dozen in New Brunswick itself, and 9 that I could tell you are particularly relevant to this application here.
I would offer Mr. Farrell as a qualified professional.
And we'll go with that.
If you could then, Mr. Farrell, if you could give us an overview of the engineering components of the proposal before the board. And I know that, that we've had engineering comments that have come from both Mr. Carley and from Mr. Bicknell's office. And if you can go through those rather than me asking specific questions.
Sure. Refer to this rendering. Would you like to label it? It's actually a blow-up of the existing conditions plan. It's not literally the same sheet.
What will mark it as A1? Sure.
All right. So as was stated by Mr. Kelso just a few minutes ago, the property is located at 147 Nielsen Street. It's identified as Block 5, Lot 6.01. It has frontage, again, along Nielsen Street of 76.86 feet and a lot area of 6,871 square feet, which for the zone is undersized. The site is largely occupied by an existing structure, a small driveway, and a stucco shed. The driveway is going to be removed or reconstructed. The shed will be removed. The building will remain, and that is largely the subject of what everybody's testimony here will be this evening, I imagine. The building is just over 4,000 square feet and was, again, largely destroyed in 2015, which is why we're here with this application today. The adjacent land uses include residential condos and apartments to the north. There's an existing parking lot just to the south. To the east, there are additional condos and apartments. And to the west, there's a vacant lot, which was, until recently, a parking deck. Nielsen Street itself can be characterized as 34 feet in width and has one vehicular lane in each direction and one bike lane as well in each direction. There's no parking on either side as it relates to the frontage of this property, and curbs and sidewalks are provided along both sides of the roadway. So I'm going to go into a little bit of the bulk variances that were discussed. As was stated, the lot area is 6,871 square feet, whereas 43,560 square feet is required, which is an existing condition. Most of these are existing conditions, or all of them. The lot width is 74.79 feet, whereas 200 feet is required. The lot depth is 91.56 feet, whereas 200 feet is required. Again, subject to the geometry of the existing lot, which is not changing. The minimum front yard is 14.2 feet, whereas 50 feet is required. And the side yard is 0.8 feet, whereas 50 feet is required. The total side yard is 2.6 feet, whereas 100 feet is required. The rear yard actually is an improvement. The proposed is 0. There's actually an existing encroachment of 1.9 feet over the rear property line, which will actually be removed when the building is renovated. So that's actually an improvement to that rear yard condition. The building height remains at 46.31 feet. However, the number of stories within that building is being increased from 3 to 4, which is why we need a use variance. The building coverage is 57.9%, whereas 25% is permitted, which is actually a reduction. The removal of the stucco shed by that calculation reduces the building coverage by about 4%. The impervious coverage increases from 81% to 87%, 87.22% to be specific, whereas 60% is committed and permitted. And that's largely, I'm going to flip this to show you the proposed layout.
What that is A2?
A2. The impervious coverage increase is largely a result of the pedestrian improvements that are being made. There will be access maybe more frequently than was prior to a door that's located along the side toward the rear of the property, and the driveway will be enlarged to actually accommodate a vehicle that might be using it to access the dumpsters or the electric meter or gas meters, or for drop-offs or deliveries. Lastly, the floor area ratio is a variance at 1.89 to 1, where 0.3 to 1 is permitted. The project itself is actually to construct 6 studio loft units and 6 two-bedroom units in this roughly 4,000 square foot building. The associated parking required for that unit count is 23 spaces. None are being proposed here, but as you may hear from our traffic expert, there's actually a New Brunswick Parking Authority commitment to provide 23 spaces in a deck nearby. The site is accessed in 2 different ways. One way is the vehicular access through the 12-foot wide driveway that's proposed, which is sufficient for, again, loading and unloading, which is not anticipated to be all that frequent. And then also to access the dumpster and the gas meters and electric enclosure should a utility provider need to actually access those areas. The driveway, I believe this is a design waiver. The driveway is located 1.5 feet from the property line, which is actually, again, an improvement over the existing condition where the driveway actually encroaches on that side lot line. This driveway will be signed in several locations to indicate that no long-term parking is permitted there. I had said there's 2 ways to access the site. The second way is by foot as pedestrians, and there's 2 ways in which pedestrians will be accessing the site. The first is the main entrance located along the frontage of Nielsen Street, the steps that you would see if you were there today. The second is around the side to an existing door and stairwell, and pedestrian access and experience along that corridor down the side of the building is being improved. Again, which is partially why there's an increase in impervious coverage. As you can see in the rendering, there are plantings proposed along the northern side of the building or the southern side of the driveway. And buffering in general, there is a 6-foot enclosure around the dumpsters, and there's similarly a 6-foot enclosure around the gas meter and the electric meters. So they are sufficiently screened and buffered certainly from the public view. They're also relatively deep into the site. Actually, they're about as deep into the site as we could make them, which further buffers and screens them from visibility. The frontage along Nielsen Street is entirely concrete, right from the curb to the face of the building. And as such, there are no existing street trees there now. None are being proposed. But we do have 2 planters that are being created that will offer an enhanced aesthetic along the front of the building as far as vegetative cover is concerned. I mentioned garbage. Garbage will be hauled away during off-peak times consistent with other similar facilities in the area. It will be a private courier. There will be no curbside pickup by the city at this location. And
what do you mean by off-peak hours? Can you just define that for me, please?
the garbage hauler will, the specifics of how the garbage hauler are going to access the site, Mr. Adams may be more able to speak to. But it's going to be typical, as with other developments that are constructed like this throughout the city. Site lighting is provided. There will be several building-mounted fixtures along the northern side of the property line, or the northern side of the building, I'm sorry, that will light the utility, the driveway and utility area. They will be fitted with the appropriate house side screens so that the light does not spill over onto the neighboring property and create a nuisance condition. It generally covers the application as a whole. We've also received comments from Mr. Carley and Mr. Bignell, and I don't believe that there are any in their reports that we could not comply with.
Could you just indicate what along the property line with the Hiram Square Association, I believe, is there fencing that's being proposed here?
There is fencing, yes. There's existing fencing along the northern property line that is going to remain. And then there is new fencing that will be provided that will enclose sort of this portion, I'm saying this, the pedestrian access along the side of the building, the electric meters, the dumpsters, the mailboxes, etc. You're not going to have people walking through this site. There is a fence along the rear of the property that will connect from the building out to the property corner and then down the sideline to connect into where the existing fence is now.
I believe there was a comment with regard to perimeter landscaping, and I believe I don't know if there's a waiver required, but on the opposite side of the building, could you point out where the property line is?
Yes. So the property line is, I believe it's 0.8 feet up in this corner, and it extends to a little bit more than 0.8 feet down in the east or the west corner of the property. And as such, there isn't a lot of space there to provide landscaping, and I believe that the facade of the building is actually an attractive feature that probably doesn't need a lot of screening.
So we're not providing any type of landscaping, low-level landscaping or anything here?
There are no shrubs or trees proposed in that location.
And then if you could just describe briefly the same situation in the rear of the building?
Along the rear of the building, the same condition applies. The rear of the building, currently, again, there's an encroachment, and maintaining access to the rear of the building to maintain those shrubs would be impractical. And again, the facade of the building sort of speaks for itself in this case.
And just if you could just touch upon stormwater management.
Sure. Stormwater management. The increase in impervious coverage is just under 6% or so. And the topography of the site slopes from west to east, from the front of the property to the rear of the property. And based on the size of the building, the size of the site, both of which are things that aren't changing, and the building making up just over 60% of the lot, there's a very, very, very small increase in regard to the stormwater runoff. It goes from 0.57 CFS in the 2-year storm to 0.58 in the proposed condition, and such a de minimis increase does not really warrant any significant stormwater management techniques, and as a result, none are proposed.
And I know you pointed it out, but I just would like, again,
Sure.
The location of the utility room and the access to the utility room?
The utility room is located in the rear corner of the property. There is a concrete masonry unit or other concrete enclosure that screens the gas room here, the gas meters here, and electric meters here from the rest of the site in general. They're accessed from 2 man-sized doors along the frontage of those enclosures, and they are separate from the dumpster enclosure. There really isn't the need to have a resident of the building accessing the gas or the electric meter enclosures, and as a result, separating them provides more control over who has access to those features.
I have no further questions for Mr. Carroll.
Any member of the board have questions?
I didn't hear you mention access by handicapped individuals, how that will be done.
From the exterior of the property, from the sidewalk down the northern side of the building is an ADA appropriate graded, I don't even think it's a ramp, I would have to check the plan, but it is an ADA compliant access to what is the first floor of the building. The entrance is into a stairwell, but at that location there's going to be a ramp constructed internally, which will bring them down. It's not a full flight of stairs, which will bring them down onto actually the floor plane sort of that you see here on this rendering.
So all of the units on that first floor are handicap adaptable, correct?
I believe the architect can speak to that more specifically,
Yep.
but certainly from the exterior, that floor is accessible.
Okay.
Any other member have a question? Tom? Seeing none. Next question.
Thank you. At this time, I would call Mr. Rosario Menino for testimony.
name.
Rosario Menino.
Can you please spell your last name?
Menino. M-A-N-N-I-N-O.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth? Proceed.
Mr. Menino, you are a licensed architect of the state of New Jersey, is that correct?
Yes.
And you're familiar with the architectural details associated with the adaptive reuse of this building?
Yes.
Menino, have you testified before this board?
Yes, the first time.
Have your credentials changed in any way since then?
No.
What was that?
I think you were here last month.
Yeah, I was here till a couple weeks ago.
Yes.
Oh, that's right, yes.
That's right.
You're right.
That's why.
And I'm not memorable. I'm sorry.
Mr. Menino, then, again, I'm not going to ask you specific questions unless we want to supplement the record, but you could go through the architectural components of the plan itself, and obviously we'd like you to deal both with the exterior and with the interior layouts of the
Sure. First, I'd like to mention 2 exhibits we have. Our proposed rendering Z001.
Is that different than what was provided in the packet?
Yes.
Okay, why don't we mark that as A3?
And this one as well, A4.
A4, thank you.
Okay. As you've already heard, it's what we are proposing is a 4-level, 12-unit apartment building, 4-level, and we are not increasing any height. So on the first floor is our handicap accessible floor. So obviously the non-handicap accessible is from the front steps here in front of the building.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, sure.
You're referring to what page? What sheet?
Z100.
And this is the same floor plans provided in the
Yes.
package? Thank you.
Sure. So you go up to the main stair here, and then you can go down through stair 1 into the first floor. The handicap accessible is through the side of the building to this walkway through here to a ramp down into the 3 2-bedroom units here. These units are handicap adaptable. The first floor units, as I said, they're 2-bedroom units. There's 3 of them, and they range from 1,055 square feet to 1,115 square feet. The common areas are 2 stairwells, stairwell 1 and stairwell 2, and as well as the sprinkler room and water meter room. The second floor is pretty much identical, 3 2-bedroom units. To the exterior, right by the side door here, we have the 12 tenant compartment mailboxes, 12 tenant compartments, and then 4 parcel lockers for larger packages, which are out here.
Referring to Z101?
Correct. On the third floor, there are 6 1-bedroom units with a loft on the 4th floor. The units range from 650 square feet to 945 square feet. The units on this floor are not handicap adaptable. As I said, it's only on the first floor. The third floor units are designed with an open floor concept with the living area on the 3rd floor and the sleeping quarters on the 4th floor loft. The only accessible route to the 4th floor is within the units themselves. So there's no common area on the 4th floor. Common areas, common corridor, stair hall, and the 4th floor, as I said, only accessible within the units. The 4th floor also has private terraces, so each unit, or each 1-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor go up to the loft space, each has a private terrace. The private terraces we're providing glass railings, just to kind of reduce the added architectural element to enhance the existing structure as is. That's pretty much it for the units. Just to mention a couple characteristics of the units. All units are going to have a washer and dryer in each unit, and all units will have an HVAC split system with a furnace within the unit suspended from the within the bathroom, and the condenser units will be on the rooftop, which are here in the rooftop and here as well, and they will all be screened in, so they will not be visible. The exterior, so the exterior brick and limestone, which is structural, shall remain. We plan on cleaning and restoring all of the architectural elements. As you can see here, there's not much change here from existing to proposed. The few differences is on these windows here, we are lowering the openings 2 feet lower just to get some more natural light within the units and to get some more visibility out. The front of the building, we plan on mimicking the existing rose window by just matching the existing frame, but now we'll just act as a glass railing again. So just it's a private terrace for the 3rd floor unit. On the, so as Frank has already mentioned, we are adding 2 planter boxes to kind of buffer the street and sidewalk from the building a little bit, and we are closing off 2 side doors here, so the main entrance in the front of the building is just going to be up here in the front as well as the side. These 2, what used to be existing doors, are going to be paneled to appear as a door, but they're going to be fixed, they're not doors. And that summarizes what I have to say architecturally. I would just like to say I believe what my client is proposing is an excellent way to keep this beautiful building a part of New Brunswick's history.
So I just ask one more further question with regard to security measures. I think there was a question on Mr. Bignell's report.
Yeah, so my client is going to add intercom system and camera system throughout the building, exterior and interior.
I have no further questions.
Any member of the board have any questions or comments with us? Saying no?
So just to answer another from Mr. Bignell's report, because the question is if there, during construction, there is any damage to the facade. Is the intent to restore that and to mimic, you know, I guess to recreate what's there?
Absolutely. So as you can see, obviously there's already shoring in place for this shell of the building. We did walk the site with our structural engineer, and he's very confident that we can maintain this shell of the building throughout the construction. There's plans to make sure shoring is in place during construction, that the existing facade will be intact.
I have no further questions.
Anyone else have a comment? Seeing none, call your next witness.
Thank you. At this time, I would call Mr. Charles Olivo for testimony.
Please raise your right hand, state your name.
Charles Olivo, O-L-I-V as in Victor O.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Mr. Legal, I know you've been here before. Have your credentials changed in any way since the last time you appeared before this board?
They have not, Mr. Chairman.
Then we will accept you as that proof.
Mr. Olivo, you did provide a traffic assessment for the board for purposes of this application, which covers not only transportation but also parking, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct, yes.
And could you give us the benefit of your summary conclusions?
Yes, as you've heard from the project site engineer and the project architect, this is an excellent adaptive reuse of a building. And what adaptive reuse allows you to do is essentially save your building stock, potentially that building stock which has great architectural features of it, rather than losing it, providing parking levels, new buildings, etc. And certainly within the city, you've seen redevelopment projects of that type. What we're proposing here is to restore this building to an active state, is to bring life and activity to the building and not provide parking on the site. And why that's important is because within this area on Nielsen, if you were to add a driveway, an active driveway, and a level of parking as you may see on other projects, you would effectively at a mid-block location be bringing vehicles in and out of a curb cut where you have an active bike lane on either side of the road, and you also have active sidewalks that connect into what I'll call more of a downtown retail-oriented area. So as part of the adaptive reuse of the building, there's also excellent transportation goals that are being created here by not creating an active access point to the site as part of the reuse of the site. Our firm looked at and reviewed the traffic and the parking conditions within the area. All traffic assessments start with that existing inventory of the roadway conditions that you have, and as you've heard from the project site engineer, you have one lane in each direction, sidewalk, bike lanes in each direction, and you also have mid-block, well-delineated crosswalk areas that get you across the street and into the area of more of your retail and your downtown along George. And that is exactly what you look for within the pedestrian realm when you're connecting residential to retail and institutional, office, and other types of uses. And in addition to that, not just the existing condition, but we look at a proposed condition with the site reused in the manner which the developer has conceived here. And because there is no traffic traveling in and out of the site proper, with the exception of a service vehicle occasionally, as you've heard from the existing curb cut that would be maintained, which would be rare and certainly wouldn't have a significant impact on the traffic flow, either pedestrian, bicyclist, or vehicular in this area, is that we look to see where the actual traffic demand would move in and out for the purposes of parking. Now, the city has excellent parking infrastructure that's located in concentrated areas, which are your parking garages. Those parking garages have a certain capacity to accommodate vehicles traveling in and out and parking, and we know these areas exist. The driveways are mature and have been in operation for some time. So when we look at the traffic generation of the site, unlike a redevelopment project where you have levels of parking or a single level of parking, we're actually concentrating the traffic and the parking in areas that you've already approved, conceived, and designed for traffic movements and for parking. We've coordinated with Mr. Karen of the Parking Authority. Having a parking authority allows you to optimize the efficiency of your parking. Rather than creating parking and traffic, parking and traffic, parking and traffic throughout the city, you concentrate those nodes of parking and traffic to areas that are designed for it. And what Mr. Karen has provided in an October 2018 letter is that the parking requirement of this site, which I would contest is different than the parking need or the parking demand, because we're located in an area well served by public transit with good walkability and good retail and commercial uses nearby as well. But the Residential Site Improvement Standards, the RSIS, has a parking requirement of 23 parking stalls for the site. Now, as part of prior projects before the city, we've actually reached out to the NJAC, and that is the body that publishes the RSIS, and asked them to look at that parking requirement or interpret it. And letters have been provided to, I believe, this board, which state that there is great flexibility in the parking requirements when we are located in areas that are well served by public transit and have walkable destinations nearby. Section 4.14C of the RSIS says that you can accept alternative parking standards when you are in these exact areas. We are approximately a 3-minute walk from the Lower Street parking garage, where we have dedicated parking that has been essentially memorialized in a letter provided by the Parking Authority, that there are 23 or more parking stalls available for this project within the parking garage located a 3-minute walk away. You're about a half mile from the train station. You're also located on the M1 and the M5 bus lines, which can be used as a shuttle from here to the train station should there be inclement weather or something like that. In addition to that, you have the 811, the 814, the 815, and the 818 bus lines, which all run, generally speaking, from that train station area. So you have excellent public transit within the area, and if you drive through this environment, you will see bike lanes, crosswalks, yield signs, the pedestal signs for pedestrians, all part of an environment that encourages multimodal transportation, which is more than just single occupancy vehicles. The census data within this area of the city says that about 42% of your traveling public use something other than a single occupancy vehicle. Public transit, walk, bike, carpool, ride share. It's almost 50% of the constituency is using another mode of transportation other than the single occupancy vehicle, which is extremely important. And it's why the downtown areas or the walkable areas, I would argue, are thriving. And this type of project to bring activity to this building that connects to those areas, I think is in concert with good transportation engineering as well as planning. What we have seen generally studying the actual demand, the actual parking demand associated with projects that are located in areas such as this, and this board has approved, and there are other projects within the city which have no parking on the subject property, but have commitments from nearby parking garages for the purposes of parking on a daily basis, is that your demand is generally speaking somewhere in the 0.5 to 1 parked car per unit. Again, we did not receive a letter from the parking authority that says that 12 units will be provided with 12 stalls in the lower Church Street parking garage. We have gained and obtained an approval from the parking authority that says the requirement of 23 can be matched within this parking garage, which is closely proximate to the site. So for that purpose, the traffic associated with this project, 12 units during the peak hour, even at the most conservative estimate, would be less than 10 trips in the peak hour. And just for a general rule of thumb, during the peak hour, traffic engineers typically look at a threshold of about 100 peak hour trips as potentially being impactful to the driving environment, and we are less than 1/10 of that. So from a traffic perspective, we would not expect this project, the reuse of this building, to have a significant adverse impact on the roadway conditions. And from a parking perspective, we are well accommodated by the nearby Lower Church Street parking garage.
Thank you, Mr. Lelo. For the record, I would just indicate I provided a copy of the parking authority letter to your council, and have extra copies if the board wishes.
You could just mark that as A5 and move that into the record.
Yes. And also for the record, from a legal perspective, and as we've done in other projects, we would enter into an agreement with the parking authority committing those spaces, and we use the typical form that the parking authority uses, and we would volunteer a condition of any approval the board should see fit to grant to entering into one of the same type of agreement for those 22 spaces. And finally, I know that the issue of resident permit parking, there is potentially the availability for residential permit parking for this facility. We are waiving any right to those residential parking permits because of our commitment from the parking authority. And that leaves those spaces available to the other residents in the neighborhood. If there's any questions for Mr. O'Leary?
Any member of the board have any questions?
Is the parking authority limiting the hours that they can park, like at nighttime only, or is it?
No.
No.
No. I mean, typically what you'll see, when you have commercial and versus residential, they do have a tendency to complement each other, but there's no limitation.
Okay. Any other questions for this? No. Seeing none.
Thank you, Mr. Lelo. At this time, I would call Mr. Paul Greigel for testimony.
Please state your name.
Yes, Paul Greigel, G-R-Y-G-I-E-L.
Do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Greigel, you are a licensed professional planner of the state of New Jersey?
Yes, since 1999.
Okay. And I believe that he has testified before this board before.
Yes, I have actually.
It's been a while. But
Correct.
Have your credentials changed in any way since last time?
No.
We'll accept your
Thank you.
Mr. Greigel, you've heard testimony from our professional witnesses with regard to the need for certain variances, many of which are existing conditions
Yes.
in the use variance. And what I'm going to ask you to do is if you could run through an analysis of those variances and hopefully provide planning support for the board's basis to grant those variances. And I'll ask you to just do that without me questioning.
Certainly. Thank you. As you've already heard, the applicant requires a number of variances, including 3 D variances. And typically that's a sign that as a project has some issues. In this case, it's very rare that the D variances, in my opinion, are very minimal and more technical in nature, given that it's an existing site an existing building that's essentially being rebuilt within its shell. So there is a D1 variance for use, which is only because of the definition of mid-rise apartments at 4 stories. If not for that, we wouldn't need a D variance. Multifamily is permitted in this zone district, the R6 zone. Likewise, the height variance, that's required a D6 height variance for exceeding by more than 10 feet or 10% the maximum permitted, is for the existing building height. It's not being increased. And there's also the floor area ratio D4 variance as well, as you heard from applicant's counsel at the outset. We don't have an exact amount which was here before, but essentially the building mass would remain unchanged given that the structure, the exterior walls of the building would remain pretty much as is. So again, it's D1 for use, D4 for floor area ratio, D6 for height. There were a number of C variances as well. I'm not going to rehash all of those. As we've heard, there's essentially all existing conditions, all of which will remain the same, one which will be improved, and then there's one that is being slightly worsened by adding some additional pavement. But I'll first deal with the D use variance and the other D variances. In my opinion, as a planner, the special reasons can be addressed for these variances for multiple reasons. First, the R6 zone does permit multifamily residential generally, so clearly it's a permitted use, an appropriate use in this type of location. It's simply adding the story internally that triggers the variance. If not for that internal loft area, we wouldn't be requesting a D1 use variance. But I would add the existing historic facade would screen that the additional story from the street, so there would be no impact from it. Likewise, in terms of the height itself, it's not being changed, so there'd be no detrimental impacts from the so-called deviation from the maximum height requirement. Same goes for FAR, given that it's an existing building facade on multiple sides that would remain, essentially the same box would be there with just different uses within it. So these variances all relate to facilitating the overall adaptive reuse of the structure, as we've heard. This is an important purpose of the both municipal land use law as well as the goal objective of New Brunswick Master Plan. The general welfare would be served by promoting the historic preservation, by maintaining the exterior facade and improving it, stabilizing it, making sure it remains for generations to come. The city's master plan specifically identifies protection and preservation of historically significant structures in balance with economic development efforts. I think this project speaks directly to both those in a way that pretty much no other project I've worked on in New Brunswick has. As the city's growth continues, I think it's important to provide for this type of redevelopment. So for those reasons, I believe a number of purposes of the municipal land use law would be addressed, notably Purpose J, promoting conservation of historic sites and structures, and Purpose A, promoting the general welfare by promoting adaptive reuse of this building. Not to mention other ones such as Purpose I, promoting a desirable visual environment by preserving the existing facade and maintaining it. With regard to the C variances that are where such as a change, the one is parking. We just heard Mr. Olivo's testimony, so I won't rehash that. But even though there's a demand for parking that's less than the requirement, the applicant is proposing to provide for the full complement of 23 parking spaces in an existing parking deck. There's also a hardship. You can't really provide the required spaces on site without adding a level to the building or essentially really messing up what's already there. So to maintain the existing footprint, to rebuild within it, you have to provide the parking off-site, and thankfully we can do that. So I think there's a hardship justification in C1 variance for that variance. With regard to the other conditions, again, the only other one that really is being changed is the maximum impervious coverage, and this is simply to provide the additional pavement for essentially building functions, as we heard, to the side of the building where there's an existing shed today. So I think that is actually a variance that can be granted under the C2 criteria, that the benefits of providing for the additional space for essentially building maintenance, etc., would outweigh any detriments, particularly as it would allow for the building to be productively reused. As to the negative criteria, the board must find that there'd be no substantial detriment to the public good. I think in this instance we've seen testimony and exhibits talking about the design of the building, talking about the way parking is being addressed, whether there's adequate transportation nearby. So for all those reasons, the reuse of this building would not have substantial negative impacts. In fact, I think it would have substantial positive impacts on the city and surrounding area. With regard to the master plan and zoning ordinance, as I cited, there are certain purposes being promoted by this application. And given that the building's essentially being reused in the exact same location and size and shape, there would be no substantial impairment to your master plan or zoning efforts.
Thank you. No further questions for Mr. Greigel?
Anyone in this board have any questions or comments for this witness? Seeing none.
That completes our presentation.
Hey, Tom, there was one question earlier about the
You're right.
the off-peak hours. Do you want to address that?
Yeah, if we could, perhaps my client could address the pickup of the recycling and garbage that was raised by Mr. Patterson. I think he needs to sort of make that.
Yeah, I'm just curious as to the hours. I believe Mr. Farrell said it's fine to pick up during off-peak hours. What exactly is meant by off-peak?
Well, typically, as in our,
Please state your name and spell out your last name.
David W. Adams.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do. Typically, as in our other projects, we have garbage pickup during the daytime, and that would be between the hours of 8 and 5. We can schedule some other times, but it would be a private truck that would come in, small front-loaded truck would come in, pick up the containers, drop them in, back out, and it's done.
Okay, so what were the hours again? That's what I was typing in.
Well, we can choose any hours, but with our other projects, we've had hours between 8 and 5 during the day. And they also allow us to do it either later or earlier, but those are the most consistent with not making too much noise.
And recycling is, you have county pickup for that, or?
No, it would be the same carting company. It would be 2 containers. It would be a trash container and a recycling container. Thanks, Dave.
Mr. Chairman, just for clarification, would that be 8 to 5, Monday through Friday?
Yes. That completes our presentation.
All right. At this time, I'd like to open it up to the public. Any member of the public would like to come forward, ask questions, please do so.
Hi.
Please don't matter.
You got to come up
sure.
and be sworn in.
Excuse me.
Please state your name, spell your last name.
Judith Duriga, D-U-R-I-C-A.
Do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do. Thank you. I just my notes here, sorry. I'm an owner and a resident at Harem Square, River Lodge. And having lived there over the last 7 years, parking is an issue. Harem Square does have dedicated parking, both garage as well as behind the units. In addition, we also have the residential permit parking. So we do have parking. However, there are times where parking is not available in front of our units, even with the residential permit parking. We have a variation of people coming in town, going to various restaurants, retail, whatever happens to be. Equally, there are 2 key restaurants, Delta's as well as Frog and Peach behind us. So we have even more traffic in our specific area. We also have several apartment buildings that also have parking. However, people feel that they can park within the Harem Square residential parking permit area. I did hear that you are looking into working with the parking authority to get parking spots. But I didn't hear if you're going to actually get the parking spots, and they will have parking spots in the lower church, or it's more that there's availability in the church.
The way we typically handle these with other projects, we've done it, is we enter into an agreement with the parking authority. They actually have committed the spaces. They've committed to the capacity in the parking garage, and that agreement provides for the individual tenants to enter into the monthly passes with the parking authority. So that is for anyone with a vehicle, that's the only way they're going to be able to park in the area. And we have formally waived our right to any of those residential permit parking passes.
Right, so it's an opt-in, you're saying? It's an opt-in? They opt in to purchase You're not providing it with the actual
No, but
rent.
we're required to make them available for them.
Right, so this is where we also, right now, we have those people that don't opt in to the parking facilities and they're parking in front of our permit parking areas. So we do
Illegally.
have that, illegally, yes, that's right. But we do experience that quite often. The other thing I did here is that you are looking at the parking, the actual residential parking permits.
No, we're waiving those.
Oh, I thought I heard something different.
No, I said they would be available, but we're waiving them.
Okay.
And it's a condition of the approval.
Fine, that's what I just
And that
wanted to
and the reason we do that is they're even, sometimes they're not available immediately, but they would be available in the future if they change. Sometimes there's certain areas of the city that don't have resident permit parking but might get it in the future.
Right.
The reason we make it a condition of approval is that's enforceable, so that in the future, any new resident who would come in, or any new owner who came in the future, that's a condition of the approval. They can never get residential permit parking passes, any of the residents here.
Right. I'm just saying today it's entitled to Harem Square at Riverwatch.
Yes,
Owners.
yes.
Right, okay. Can I change subject or? Yes, okay, thank you. Sorry, I just have my notes here. The other bit was landscaping was brought up in terms of it being impractical to maintain. We do quite a bit at Harem Square to maintain our landscaping. And we really go above and beyond in terms of our homeowners association dues to make sure that Harem Square is looking at its peak. And it does cost, and it's not impractical. And so I'd like to maybe throw that back out to say, while your neighbors, and as well as the rental community too, they all put their fair share of landscaping in the general area.
The primary reason for this project not being able to accommodate landscaping in those areas is there's no place for it, because the building remains and it's essentially against the property line.
Right, I think I'm referring to the planters.
Yes.
I believe that you said were or not in or out of scope.
No, they are putting planters.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank
In
you.
lieu of taking the concrete up and putting
Right.
other landscaping, they're putting planters.
Right, okay, thank you. The other thing was, and I'm not quite sure, was the drainage. We are in a flood zone in that area, so I just wasn't sure what the drainage, I thought someone said that you met the, I don't know if you meet the flood requirement, but drainage was mentioned. I heard, but I didn't hear what will be happening, because we are in very close proximity to you in terms of the synagogue, or Nielsen Crossing, excuse me. So if you can provide a little bit more clarity on that.
The site, Frank Farrell, I testified a couple minutes ago for the record. As has been described, the building is going to remain. Most of the site is the building, and the increase in runoff is 0.01 cubic foot per second, which is exceedingly small for the site in every storm event, from the 2 to 10, the 2 to 10, 25 to 50, and the 100-year storm events have all been analyzed, and the case is that the increase is exceedingly small.
So I guess what our concern is in between the two property lines,
Sure.
and making sure that the drainage is adequate in terms of whatever needs to be done, so it doesn't come into our property line either.
The drainage pattern in the area is going to remain as it does today. There's not a significant change in the grade on the site, and as a result, there's not a significant change in the way that the water will drain from it.
I would just ask that you do look at it, because you know, it is a dated building. I don't know what the conditions are today, but we obviously have worked very hard to make sure that there's appropriate drainage, and we had to redo our drainage, actually, to be honest with you. So I would say, please remember that.
Okay.
Again. The private terraces, I wasn't quite sure in terms of what siding the private terraces would be held on.
Both sides.
Okay, so both sides you'll have private terraces?
Yes. Yeah. They'll look exactly like that, and they're set 5 feet back.
Okay, because I just see the rendering on this side, so we weren't aware that this property owner would then have terraces looking in here.
Well, I mean, the perspective of this tent, like, there's a pretty good scale of it, right? To see up here, I mean, we're looking down at the roof. It's not, we're not.
Thank
Go.
Excuse me, sorry. Construction time delays, we got, I think that were my primary things, and Glenn answered a couple of the other ones. That would be it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other member of the public who should come forward? Please come forward, state your name. And
Please state your name, spell your last name.
Leonid Shikman.
Sorry, your name?
First name Leonid, Leonid. Last name Shikman, Shikman.
Do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
go ahead, sir.
My question is, how the fire escape from the new building is designed? I'm a civil engineer by trade, retired. On both sides of the building or on one side of the building? What kind of fire escape is designed?
Excuse me, I can answer that for you. So the building is fully sprinkled, all buildings sprinkled, and there's 2 fire egresses there.
This is about the sprinkler system.
And there's 2 egress.
Where are
They're
the
fire
two-
rated.
Where are the 2 egress?
Just one in the front and one to the side, more towards the rear.
And no more ladders
Correct.
or fire escapes around the building, right?
Correct.
Is this accepted by,
Yes.
by the code?
Yes.
All right. My second question was that the lady mentioned before is the capacity of the drainage from the basement to the street, which exists now, good enough for 12 apartments, for the code of 12 apartments?
Are you asking about the sanitary system or
No,
the stormwater?
the water drainage.
Stormwater.
Is this okay for 12 apartments?
I'm not sure that the number of units contained, since the building shell remains and the exterior limit walls are not getting any larger, the drainage associated with the development hasn't changed as far as the building is concerned. The number of units compared to the stormwater runoff are really not related.
This was my question. Thank you.
Any other member of the public? Please come forward, ma'am.
I'm Elizabeth Hance, H-A-N-C-E. I'm a member of I'm actually an officer at the Brunswick Church, which is located at the corner of Nielsen and Byard Streets, catty corner across from the development.
Do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Of course. Our concern goes back again to the parking. We are an urban congregation with an urban church with a commuter congregation. And the same issues that were raised previously by the representative from Hiram Square are the same issues we have. Explain to me again the parking. As I understand, you have arranged with New Brunswick Parking Authority to have 23 monthly passes available. Will there be 23 designated spots?
No.
Will the residents be required to purchase the monthly vouchers?
If they want to have a vehicle and they want to have the vehicle available to them in that location, they're going to have to. Because there's no other parking
what is to
available.
stop them from parking where the lower Byard Street where we are now, between Nielsen Street and George Street, is continually parked up. It's parked up by visitors to Hiram Square. It's parked up by people living in the other apartments that don't want to have a parking voucher. We worship on Sunday morning in our church. Sunday morning when we come in, the parking authority stops charging for parking at the meters at 8 o'clock on Saturday night. And they don't charge all day Sunday. What is to stop your residents or your visitors to your residence from parking along Byron Street instead of parking at the Church Street deck?
Well, since your church doesn't provide parking at all, I assume they have the same issue that your commuters have when they come into town looking for a place to park. At least on Sunday, they can park for free. The people who live here are going to have to pay for monthly passes. But they can't park in residential permit parking spaces
Right.
any more than your parishioners can when they come in looking for parking, since you don't have any.
But
on Sunday.
somebody in your development can park at 8:01 PM on Saturday night and be there all through Sunday.
Not in a residential permit parking.
Ours is not residential permit parking.
You don't have any parking.
Right,
So
okay,
you don't-
that section of Byron Street has, no, it's metered parking, but on Saturday nights from 8:01 PM through all day Sunday, okay, it is, the
Elizabeth,
meters.
there's no way for me to say that a person, if they want to violate the law and they want to park where parking's not permitted, or they want to park beyond what a meter is provided for, they're subject to the same responsibility that your parishioners are when they come in. So there's no way to
Mr.
really
Kelso,
say
I
that
don't-
can't happen.
Either I'm not making myself clear, or you're not understanding that section of Lower Byron Street.
know it very
They're not overstaying anything. I'm saying from 8:01 PM through all day Sunday, the parking is free. It's free for all church members, it's free for any of your residents or any of your visitors. Here's my concern. My concern is, unless there are 23 designated spots set aside in the Church Street parking deck, if I'm a resident, I get to circle around and around and around in the hopes of finding a spot, or I'll just find the free street parking on Saturday night.
I don't,
If I understand it right, somebody who's going to have a vehicle has to park their vehicle 7 days a week. So they may be looking for, you're saying they're going to be looking for free parking Saturday night into Sunday. But in order for them to park the other 6 days of the week, they have to get a permit, or they have to pay for the parking in the deck. So it wouldn't make sense for them to move their car somewhere else for a night because they've already paid for 6 other days.
in covered
I mean,
parking. In covered parking.
Yeah.
The concern we have is that parking is, despite what we're hearing about parking decks and everything being available in New Brunswick, that little part of New Brunswick, parking is such a limited, finite, a much demanded resource, all right, that unless these people are required to park in the Church Street parking deck, and it doesn't seem like they're going to be required to park, they're not required to buy the permits, okay, and they're not going to have designated
They're not
spots.
required to bring a car either. A lot of people don't, and that is been well documented in a lot of the projects that we have downtown. We have a tremendous amount of wasted parking in the other apartment projects right down by this, where the spots are never filled up. You go down to 100 Riverwatch, 100 Hiram Square down there. Those parking spaces are never full. And we added, this board, I believe it was, added, I think it was 10 or 12 units to your church to provide additional housing in there to help the church. And no parking was provided. And yes, people who do live in supportive housing do have cars occasionally.
I grant you that, okay, but if parking was not a requirement, why is 23, why are you coming before this board and saying, but we've arranged with the New Brunswick Parking Authority for 23 parking spots?
Well, isn't that quite what your church did when you asked for the 12 units to be added? Did you ask for a waiver of the parking also?
Yes.
Yeah, you had to, because
Yes,
when
you asked for a parking
there
density
has to be
by
a RSIS standard of parking, and you asked for that same exact waiver before this board. So, and you didn't even come before us and grant and ask for the waiver or the parking authority for extra, to put aside the spots. So, they went above and beyond.
And I hear what you're saying. There's a difference between a nonprofit, okay, supportive housing for domestic abuse victims, and a for-profit development that's going to put further constraints on the limited parking. That's the difference.
A car's a car, Liz.
A car is a car, but they're...
And we're not talking about whether it's a nonprofit or profit. You're talking about a problem of a car parking on the street. A car's a car.
I know, but much like the Hiram Square people, we know that you will have people in that development parking along that stretch of Byard Street. You will.
They're providing an alternative for.
And how is it going to be enforced?
New Brunswick Parking Authority enforces it. And your point on Sunday mornings is no, there's no meter parking on Sunday mornings, but I think as Ms. Chester said, if someone's going to have a car there, they got it there 7 days a week. And what's the alternative? I mean, I haven't heard of any other alternatives for this building.
Okay, the alternative is that they, instead of just having 23 permits from New Brunswick Parking Authority, that they have 23 designated spots in the Church Street deck.
That would be a waste of the parking space in the deck, because by having it this way, you can use the same space for multiple users.
That's my point. I just thought that they needed, somehow it's not going to be enforceable. They will be parking on the streets and they will be using up additional limited parking.
It'll be enforced to the point of what the parking authority is allowed to enforce. They can't enforce any parking violations at the meters from, like you said, Saturday at 8 p.m. this Monday morning at 8 a.m. or whatever time they start. So it's for anybody to park there. I can go and park my car downtown, go visit the restaurants, and I can leave my car there overnight if I want to. And the parking authority can't do anything about it, so it's not just the residents down there, it's for anybody in the city or anyone visiting the city can park in those spots free of charge for that amount of time.
I grant you that.
Please come forward. Ma'am, state your name.
Please state your name and spell your last name.
Janice Sader, S-A-D-E-R.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Absolutely. I'm not an important person. I don't matter that much, but I feel that under certain circumstances, that what I might say may be important. For those people who maintained this building before you so eloquently may change it, they had a great regard for, like, as you do, I think, for the historical, for, you know, the spiritual and the community. And I believe that for those people who devoted their lives in some way to that building in some way, you know, that somehow there should be given some level of respect that may or may not be, you know, seen or heard, but somehow shown. You know, I don't know how, but somehow should be given something more than what they made a stupid mistake, and the building happened the way it did. But they, for decades, for a long time, they took care of and gave it a good place in the community. And I just feel that even though they don't have the money to move into your building, you know, maybe, you know, they brought a level of joy that I don't think we see too much anymore. And I don't know how, but I just hope that somehow those people that help to bring this joy will still have some level of integrity and respect when they go past it, you know, when they walk past your building, you know? So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public?
If it becomes your building, I'm sure it will, Chris.
Charlotte, come forward.
state your name, spell your last name.
Charles Cradaville, Kratovil.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
You may proceed.
Good evening, members of the board. Charles Cradaville. Lived in New Brunswick for the past 15 years. I'm very familiar with the property. We covered the unfortunate fire that happened there. I have some general questions that I hope the developer can answer. First of all, is the building going to be entirely privately financed?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Is the developer planning to apply for a long-term tax exemption from the city government?
No.
Okay. It seems like it's, if approved, going to be a very nice place to live, and I would maybe live there if I could afford it, but I want to ask how much approximately these units will be going for.
They're going to be based on market rents.
So for the lofts would be ballpark?
I don't have to do the front, it can be whatever in the areas of one bed.
Okay, so probably at least 4 figures for all of the units. While it does seem like a nice project and certainly an improvement on the status quo, I do have some concerns I wanted to ask about. So first of all, if I were disabled and wanted to live in the building, only the first floor units would be a possibility, right? And those are all 2-bedroom units. So if I was on my own, I would have to either pay for a second bedroom that I wouldn't be able to use, or that wouldn't be rented, wouldn't be occupied, or just wouldn't be able to live in the building, correct?
Yes, only the first floor is going to be handicapped.
Okay.
There's no place for an elevator. We tried that. There's no opportunity to do anything. So the first floor will be handicapped.
Right, I understand. I would, respectfully suggest that, the plan be revisited, and, perhaps an elevator could make the other floors accessible. I know, there's a lot of...
I think that's what Mr. Adams said. They did investigate that, and they found it to be impractical. That was the answer, that they did look at it.
Okay, well, another alternative would be to mix up the units a little bit, so it's not only 2 bedrooms on the first floor. You could have one bedroom as opposed to all 2 bedrooms would be one way to make it more friendly to folks with disabilities. I'm also a little concerned, considering it's an area that can flood. Did I hear 6% increase in impervious coverage?
No.
Approximately.
Oh, the impervious coverage.
So, I would ask, why? Why not stay within the existing, impervious coverage, the existing footprint? Is there a need to go beyond it? It's already takes up most of the lot.
The improvements proposed are predominantly, again, the building exists, we're not changing the building. Improvements are to provide the appropriate and adequate pedestrian and utility vehicular access to the features that are on the site.
So it's like a new driveway?
It's a new driveway to allow a refuse vehicle to access the dumpsters and to allow a utility vehicle, should the need arise, to access the gas and electric enclosures. And then the sidewalks are all the appropriate width that you'd expect to find for pedestrians that would like to access the building.
Okay. Can you tell me why it has to be such a long driveway, take up, all that?
The length of the driveway is 2 things. One is you can actually pull the vehicle into the site here rather than have it sticking out onto the street. If for some reason there's loading or some other function, that the vehicle could stay there. If work is needed on the electrical and gas meters, and pulling things toward the front of the site just brings them into the public view. We wouldn't normally want to put a dumpster up on the street, or the same thing with the electric and the gas.
All right, so you can screen it though, right?
It is screened. It is screened. There's a block wall, again, block enclosure around the electric and gas meters, and there is a fence style enclosure around the dumpsters.
Thank you.
I would also add the impervious coverage is due to the handicap walkway. It's part of the reason why we're increasing it, that slight increase.
Thank you for the answers. The final concern I want to raise is about parking, and I think Mr. Olivo outlined some of the aspects that would make the board inclined to grant a parking variance. It is just about a block away from most of the bus routes that go through New Brunswick. Certainly it is in a downtown high-density area. However, my concern is on the parking authority's commitment to meet whatever needs these residents have. And I just want to ask, I don't see anybody here. Is there anybody from the parking authority that can testify to the situation at the Lower Church Street deck?
We don't need to have anyone from the parking authority if we do have a certified letter or a letter from the parking authority certifying the same.
And the condition is to provide a written agreement, so we will have a written agreement.
Right. I understand. For now you have a letter, and I wouldn't object to the letter being part of the record, but without Mr. Karen being able to be here to answer questions, there is some testimony I'd like to give about my concerns. So earlier this year, I did speak directly with Mr. Karen about a program that the authority, I guess in theory, has for workers who work typically in the nightlife, restaurants and bar scene, to be able to get a discount monthly permit that would be only in use, in the nighttime hours. And the program does currently exist, in theory, but no one has signed up. Well, no one's currently signed up for that program. And so I was looking at ways that, maybe the program could be improved such that people would actually want to and actually follow through and sign up for it. And the thing I learned that was a key point was that there's only one parking deck at which your permit is good under this discounted system. It's the wellness parking deck, which is, there's Destination Dogs and a couple other places nearby. But most of the for instance, folks who are working at Deltas or Frog on the Peach, and some of the, it's called Blackthorn now. Some of those places, it's a bit of a far walk, and sometimes people are getting out of work very late at night and might not feel comfortable taking that walk to the wellness. And so I proposed to Mr. Karen, I said the Lower Church Street deck would be a much more popular choice if you were able to make that open to this program. And I was told that that's not a possibility because the Lower Church Street deck is one of the most popular decks in the city, and sometimes it does fill up from time to time. And so if that is true and that is the case, then I would have to express concern about the parking authority promising to give 23 spaces but not reserving those spaces or setting those spaces aside, because what's going to happen on a night when that Church Street garage is full is that these folks who have the monthly passes will be out of luck and have to engage in these other parking spaces that were discussed tonight. So I think it's a valid concern. I think that respectfully the board ought to adjourn the hearing and ask that the parking authority be able to speak on this matter and outline if this is going to, how they're going to actually get everybody to be able to park in this deck, or if not, to be able to outline a contingency plan for, if your permit, if the deck is full, maybe you can use the same permit to park in the Morris Street deck, which I know this board and other boards have approved a lot of variances that, because the Morris Street deck never fills up and always has vacancies, there are agreements that Mr. Kelso's clients in the past have gotten successfully to set aside those permits. But in this case, without Mr. Karen here to testify, I think it might be a mistake to count on 23 spaces in a garage that this same person has previously expressed does fill up from time to time. And so, because I'm here to be constructive, I don't want to leave without giving you an alternative or another idea. I was alluding to what's the alternative. I think that Lower Church Street might be the closest deck to this building, but if not closer, a close second is the private parking deck that the I guess Matrix put up just about a block away from here. And that, because it's maintained by a private company, I don't have insight or accurate figures as to how often or if it does ever fill up at all. But that might be a better solution for this particular applicant. The deck might well be closer in terms of on foot. It's just about a block away, and it might have more space. So I do think that in the interest of making sure that the parking needs of these residents are met, and that the other residents who already have a tenuous parking situation don't get into a worse situation, I would, respectfully ask the board to just adjourn and continue the hearing with additional witnesses as necessary. And I think that's all I have. And thank you for answering my questions and hearing me out.
Mr. Chairman, address a bit of Mr. Crowder-Bill's questions when he asked about whether the deck is full or not. How does the parking authority address that? I'm not the parking authority, but I've had conversations with Mr. Karen before. I believe with Mr. Crowder-Bill, present at either Traffic Commission or one of these hearings before, where a deck like Church Street is a mix of monthly passes and dailies. So they can adjust how many dailies they have versus how many monthly passes to try to accommodate. I can't guarantee that in every instance that it will always work, but that's how they try to adjust that. There would be less daily parking at the deck and more spaces for monthly users. And they balance that. It's one of the things that the parking authority manages as to how many daily parkers are going in there, how many monthly parkers are going in there.
Anyone, please come forward.
State your name and spell your last name.
Robert Barrow, Harabia, Graf von Rosenberg.
Spell it, please.
Sure. H-R-A-B-I-A B-A-R-O G-R-A-F as in Foxtrot, V-O-N R-O-S-Z-E-N B-E-R-G. Robert Garapia Barrow, Graf von Rosenberg. 47 Walton Street, here in New Brunswick.
Swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
It is. But I don't swear, I affirm. According to Jewish law, I don't swear, I affirm. So, members of the board, thank you. The sad thing is about the synagogue is that it burnt down. Unfortunately for me, I can only speak for me, I can't speak for anybody else. It's sad. Because I have nowhere to pray to, I have to go to another municipality in Highland Park. And I unfortunately lost my parents, and due to that situation, it is very convoluted and twisted. The bottom line is, I came to this synagogue, Polit Tzedek, and I was welcomed with open arms. The rabbi and his wife and his family have been totally awesome, and some of the congregants have been great. It's very unfortunate for me, as a Jew, not to be able to use this synagogue as what it's meant to be, a house of worship. This is beautiful rendering, beautiful rendering. I have a grandfather who was a civil engineer. He was an ordained rabbi, came to the United States to be a civil engineer. So I understand all too well about the ramifications of everything you went through just before. And I appreciate that, and I understand about their schooling and everything else is great. However, for a person like me, there's no place else to go in New Brunswick. This is a landmark synagogue, which was, I believe this building was a replication of the exact replication of a synagogue in Warszawa, in Warsaw, Poland. And you can see, and everybody's talking about the edifice, the structure of it, and it's gorgeous. And the sad thing is that the outside is going to be maintained, but the inside's not. The inside is going to be used as a dwelling place, and it's not going to be used as it was originally developed by congregants here in New Brunswick to worship as Orthodox Jews. It's really sad that this has to be used for dwelling. Now, we have an eloquent woman who spoke about parking, and she represents one of the churches. It would be sad to say we're using the structure of the church, but the inside we're going to make it a living place. a place, and they rip out everything and not having any area, not for battered women, not for anybody, but just for, I mean, not just including them, but just not have an altar, not have anything. That's a shame today. For me, for hearing that my synagogue is going to be a dwelling, just strictly for dwelling, and no praying, nothing. That's sad. I did have to go in with the rabbi to look at the aftermath of what this synagogue looked like after it was burned. And we did find something. We did find something. It happened to be a yod, which was a pointer that is used for our sacred scroll. That's one of the only things. And the rabbi came out with our Sefer Torah. That's one of a very important, the most precious gift you could possibly get from Judaism is that our 5 books of Moses. And the bottom line is, that's going to be all God. And all the congregants, oh, by the way, the Honorable Judge Pincus's family and so many others have worshipped, who are Jewish, or who practice Orthodox Judaism, have prayed in the synagogue. They didn't use it as a dwelling place, as a place for sleeping, getting up in the morning. They didn't use it as apartments. They used it just for the intent of what it was supposed to be. And that intent was to pray. I don't feel as though that it's necessary for me to have to schlep, if you don't mind me using Yiddish, I have to walk all the way over to the next municipality, over the Raritan River, to go to Highland Park, and then pray. I don't think I have to do that today when we have a viable structure. I didn't hear anything about how horrible the structure was on the outside. I heard that it's rather sturdy, that it'll be protected. That's what I heard. But what about people like myself? I can't speak about people. I can only speak about me. Robert Harabi, Barrow, and Rosenberg. I'm naming this all the titles of my forefathers who were Jewish that came to this country. The bottom line is, I don't have an alternative. I don't. I can't say, here's $1 billion. Let's rebuild this. I don't have that today. All I have is a congregant. Well, actually, let me qualify this. I don't have enough money to be a member of our congregation. Sad but true. I do come from an affluent family, but unfortunately, right now, I don't have enough money to be a member. So let's put that on record. But the rabbi has opened his doors open, if you don't mind the pun, for me to pray. And that's something that will be sorely missed, because this is the only historic synagogue in this municipality today. We don't have any others. Yeah, we have across the river, but we surely don't have them here in New Brunswick. And this is a shame. This is a shame. This house of worship is going to be converted into apartment dwellings. It said, silence says, not you, but without me saying anything, it says volumes. And that's a shame that people like myself, I have to go somewhere else. And it's a beautiful structure. And all I can say is just, I would not be comfortable leaving this building, leaving this area, without sharing my deepest thoughts on when I first arrived here in New Brunswick from East Brunswick, and was welcomed with open arms to a beautiful congregation of men and women, predominantly men where I pray with, and were showing me the beauty of Judaism working in unity with each other, in harmony. That's where I'm at today, and that's where I have a personal conflict. and I'm thinking of the better good, that this was designed, I'll be a little bit more repetitive, that this was designed as a synagogue, not to have a structure of a synagogue, and not to have a dwelling place, because that would have been developed in the 1920s. And with that being said, I want to thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to personally share my own opinion. Thank you very much and have a pleasant evening.
Please come forward.
Please state your name and spell your last name.
If you could just spell that for me? Can you spell your name for me, please?
K-H-A-I-M.
Chaim?
Give right. There, here.
Thank you, Mr. Blow.
Sorry.
Do you swear or affirm to say the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Sorry for my English. I came without a word in English. When I came here, I find a home, a religious home, what I never got in Russia. Russia, it was a crime. Hebrew was a crime. Yiddish only to show the world that in Russia something is a little bit. In Moscow synagogue, it was a place to show the ambassador from the other country, the journalist, but if a young man came, was and find where he work, where he is a student, and go away. In this situation, we came nothing knowing about our roots, about what we are. When I came here, I found a home. When I started to be a real citizen of America and a real man of my nation, of my religion, of my grandfathers. The fathers were separated from religion. The fathers should be Komsomol, communist, or something. I never was a communist, but I was a Komsomol. Why? I should be between people, something to do. What I do like a Komsomol, I did in Sevastopol. The city was destroyed in wartime. I did calls to plant trees. It is my duty of a Komsomol. I do it. I understand. I do it for people, for my city, for the life. Here I find, when I came with my children here, I find a place where I remember my grandfather. And I don't know Hebrew, but I pray in Russian, in Russian translation. But, you know, there should, in my building, there are a lot of people like me. And people need a small place to finish our life, to feel the difference between Russia and America. You understand? You know, think about our synagogue never asked the state to help. Maybe it was a mistake. Around the religious buildings was prepared for the grants, and our synagogue never asked it. It was a piece of American story, a piece of the story of this city. The synagogue was built with people who came from the places where I live, where I was born. Think about for us it is very necessary to have in this city a place to stay religious, to be citizens, to be thankful to America for the hospitality, for all difference, what we got came in here. Think about, please. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, there seem to be a number of folks that have brought up the issue of whether the synagogue and the ongoing operations of this structure as a synagogue is an issue that's being considered by the board. Just so members of the public are clear, through the chair, if I may, the application here is not for the continued use of the structure as a synagogue. This board can only consider the application as it's presented.
Thank you. Please step forward.
Please state your name, spell your last name.
Abraham J. Mykoff, M-Y-K-O-F-F, like in Frank. Frank.
Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Prior to my comments, I'd like to present, I'll read it to you, a email from one of the neighbors on street. This is from a Donnie Zinkin.
If I may, Rabbi Michael, if I may. Mr. Chairman, we can't consider a document where the writer of that document is not here to testify to. We can certainly introduce it into the record if he wishes, but there's no opportunity for this applicant to cross-examine that individual.
Okay. Can I present the
You can present it.
Okay, thank you.
We'll mark that as 01.
Sorry.
Just marking it as, for the record.
Mark it as a.
Okay, allow me, I'm the rabbi of Congregation Poland Tzedek, which unfortunately experienced a tragic fire. And in fact, right now we are in federal court in a suit for product liability suit, and hopefully we'll be able to recoup something of the congregation, which is past, what it is, what it serves, will serve, and perhaps we'll be able to serve. The congregation draws many, many people, individuals from all over, from all the towns, from New York, from Florida, from all different places that come to Brunswick, New Jersey, to the hotels because of the synagogue of Poale Tzedek. Every summer, every holiday, there are hundreds of families throughout the year that come, and the city benefits from these individuals. Tonight, by the way, begins the date of the 10th of Tevet, the 10th day of Tevet, which is a fast day. Tomorrow will be a fast day commemorating the siege of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylonia, and which ultimately, 2.5 years later, was the destruction of the temple and the city of Jerusalem. And hopefully it will be and as we experienced, once again it was rebuilt, and even in our own day. Similarly, I hope that Congregation Poale Tzedek will be able to be rebuilt. What do we do? Number one, you heard from a Mr. Block, and there are 60 resident families on that street, on 90 Nielsen Street, that the synagogue services. Furthermore, the hospitals. There are many, many individuals who are there. Their families come, and they are able to use the media, they serve the congregation and its services. We just celebrated Jewish holiday of Hanukkah, which was the religious, spiritual victory over the Greek forces. And at that time, the inculcation of the Greek was from an individual called Alexander the Great, who conquered the Middle East at this time. Subsequently, he was a benevolent despot and allowed the temple to continue. However, he wanted to place, he ordered...
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, Mr. Michael, if I may.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, if the testimony can be limited to the application itself.
Yeah,
I understand, Reverend Mykoff, I know that you're probably getting to there's always there's a connection, I'm sure.
Yes.
But there are a number of folks here in the audience that would like to be heard.
Yes.
And the board members do volunteer their time to be here, so if we could perhaps...
Okay, I'm coming to the
Thank you, sir.
And he ordered that a statue be placed in the temple, which was sacrilege. However, the wise sages told him And instead of a statue to commemorate and memorialize you, we will have a living memorial. That living memorial would be that every child that will be born that year will have the name Alexander, so that it will be perpetuated to this very day. Many an individual, his Jewish name is Alexander, which is representing from Alexander the Great. What does it got to do over here? Similarly, okay, the congregation has sustained a great tragedy. However, there is right now a great opportunity to rebuild it. Now, what does it got to do with tonight? It has a very important issue. The New Jersey statute. I'm not an attorney, but the New Jersey statutes, Title 16, regarding religious corporations and the sale of it. We're told that it's required to have a majority of the congregation voting.
Madam Chairman, if I may. Sorry, I have a mic off. Mr. Chairman, the purpose of the application is not to, I understand that there was some controversy as to whether the application, the congregants approved the application to be before this board or not. This board can't consider that. This is not the forum. As the members of the board know, their sworn duties are very limited as to consider the applications, and that's under the municipal land use law. We can't consider, there are other forums that Rabbi Mykoff's comments really should be litigated in, not this one.
Thank you for your attention. I appreciate it.
Anyone else? Hey, first up, please keep the comments to the application itself and not say anything else. Thank you.
Please state your name.
Michael
your last
Tublin,
name.
Tublin. I'm a Hiram Square resident.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. I'm a Hiram Square resident. I've lived in New Brunswick and around New Brunswick my whole life. I went to the temple when I was 5. So there's a great sadness that it burned. But I think there'd be even greater sadness if we let the building just crumble and go away. And so this project, I think, is fantastic. I'm in full support of it, and so that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Anyone else in the public? Please come forward.
Please state your name.
Michael
last name.
Wasserman, Wasserman.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes. Thank you very much. I just want to allay any concerns. I'm a member of the congregation. On December 17th, 2017, just 1 year ago, the congregation voted 21-4 in favor of selling the building. All the other comments are just irrelevant. Duly constituted authority said, in the best interest of the congregation, we have to sell this burnt-out building. Thank you.
Just one second. We have a member of the board that needs to recuse himself real quick to the bathroom. Can we take a quick?
Yeah, take
Excuse. Back on the record. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak?
Object to it.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, if there are no other members, this would be the last person, then they're recalled.
Okay. Oh, this lady, please come forward, ma'am.
Bakshir, BAKSHIYE, V as in Victor A.
Okay. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
The neighbors.
Thanks for giving me time. I'll be very quick. I know you guys don't want to hear about how personal it is for us. We're immigrants, and I know that America is the only country, and I traveled a lot, that actually allows you to be who you are. No other place in the world. And what I want to say is that for you to personally just take in consideration that this place is the bill of soul for many, many people here. My soul and my kid's soul grew in this. And I've become the person who I am in there. And for me to get this destroyed, and it's beautiful from the business point of view, I'm a business person, that's a disaster. But the other thing I wanted to see, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think you requested for adjournment to hear the testimony from the authority, and I believe you said you have a letter. Well, if you have a letter and you're taking this letter without the testimony, why Rabbi Michael's email was not taken as a testimony when you said that the person has to be here? That's my only question. That's all I have to say.
Because in the case of the representations that are made in the letter on behalf of the corporation, they are a condition of approval to actually enter into an agreement that's set forth in that letter in order for any approval that would be granted to be valid.
Mr. Chairman, we can add to that, this is also a routine business record that we receive from our professionals, including members of the staff of the ancillary departments that serve the city as well. Just like we would receive a letter from the utilities authority saying that they would serve or will serve letter indicating that they will service by providing electricity.
Anyone else from the public? Please go forward now, we're going to close this.
Thank you.
And then this will be the last person we're taking. That will be calling previous people who testified.
Construction times, I wasn't clear on what times start and finish.
Just restate your name for the record, I'm sorry.
Judith Perry. Construction times?
What do you mean by construction
What
time?
times start and end? Do we have it laid out in terms of when they will start?
When they're going to start?
Not necessarily date and time. Time.
Hours?
Yes, hours of construction.
I believe that's also regulated by the city.
Comply with the city ordinance whenever that allows.
Okay. And then also the frequency
I
of.
believe the construction hours are generally 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., I believe.
Okay. Thanks. And then the pickup, the garbage pickup, I know was mentioned Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. What's the frequency of the pickup?
Twice a week.
Twice, thank you. And then the last one was the fencing. I don't see the proposed, is the fencing going to continue with the wrought
That's on our
iron?
property.
What will the fencing consist of in terms of the 6-foot fencing around the garbage area?
In the front, but along the sides of the property is going to be fencing.
What kind of fencing?
I think the fencing that's there now is going to remain.
But you're going to put 6-foot fencing in, I thought you said, around the garbage?
There's a combination of the gas and electric meters are enclosed in a block wall, and there is an enclosure around the dumpster that I believe is board-on-board fencing, so that it is appropriately screened from view. There is also fencing that extends from the limit of where the fencing along the common yard, the common side yard, it's going to extend to the rear corner and then connect to the building.
Close that area off, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Public portion of this meeting is now closed. Members of the board have any comments or concerns?
You know, or it gets destroyed or something, we do not have enough of that kind of construction still.
And I would say, while I emphasize with folks that are here who are were very involved in the congregation, this is something that everyone is saddened by, the fire, but I think the option that we have to look at is what is before us. I think that this will help to preserve your history. You may not have it for the same use that you had it in the past, but it appears that the other option would be to remove the building and put something else up. I think this developer is keeping that history as best that can be done, and I agree that this is a good option.
Okay. Glenn?
Chairman, if the board seeks to make a positive recommendation, I would suggest the following conditions be attached to the application. Compliance with the terms of the DNR engineering report dated September 24th, 2018. Submission of all necessary easements and/or cross-access agreements for review and approval by the board attorney and the city engineer prior to the filing of same. Payment of a site performance bond in amount to be reviewed and approved by the city engineer. Submission of a site inspection escrow deposit for engineering inspection fees in amount to be calculated pursuant to Title 1624-160. Payment of all water and sewer connection fees pursuant to Title 1304 and 1308. Issuance of road opening permit from the city engineer if required. Compliance with the terms of the Big Nell Consulting Group report dated September 24th, 2018. Mandatory monetary contribution to the city's tree preservation trust fund amount to be required by Title 8.48. Planning review escrow funded for all anticipated post-approval reviews, pending other fees due to the city of New Brunswick related to the development or use of the project, paying of all outstanding taxes and water and sewer fees, Middlesex County Planning Board approval or waiver, Freehold Soil Conservation District approval or waiver, submit engineering site plan to comply with any changes required by the planning and engineering memos or plan amendments offered at the hearing, submit architectural plans to comply with any changes required by the planning or engineering memos or plan amendments offered at the hearing. All utilities and site improvements to be maintained by the applicant at their sole expense. All on-site utilities to be constructed underground. All temporary encroachments in the public right-of-way shall require city council approval. All construction staging shall be done on-site unless an encroachment allowing for the same is approved by the city council. Streets shall be kept clean of sediment and debris. The applicant shall cause the streets to be cleaned. If directed so by the Director of Public Works, tracking pads shall be installed at all construction exits. Replacements of damaged streets, curbs, and sidewalks per the direction of the city engineer. There's a voluntary waiver of the right for occupants of the subject development to obtain residential or business on-street parking permits. The hours of construction be limited to the city's hours of 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. No construction on weekends. Trash pickup to be provided by a private hauler as necessary, with pickups to be done on weekdays between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. Exterior, have that one. That's it, I believe.
A second.
Evelyn Escona?
Yes.
Doug Sheehan?
Yes.
Peg Chester?
Yes.
John Zimmerman?
Yes.
Evan Adorno?
Yes.
Sue McElligott?
Yes.
John Cox?
Yes.
Thank you.
Variance application for the conversion of a former place of worship into a retail storefront at 121 French Street, Block 26, Lot 4, zoning district C-210.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Peter Lanford. I'm an attorney representing the applicant. This evening, I intend to present two witnesses in this matter. By way of history, this is a building that was constructed in 1950. The building occupies 100% of the property. The most recent use of the property was by the Jehovah's Witnesses as a house of worship, which occupied the entire first floor. The second floor, and you'll hear testimony from our architect, was used as apartments. However, to the best of our knowledge, those apartments were never approved by anybody. It appears they originally started as offices and then were somehow converted along the way. This application is to basically convert the first floor to retail space. construct a new facade, and to convert the second floor, which doesn't cover the entire length of the building, about half, to two apartments which are permitted uses within the zone. The only reason we're here is because the site is 100% building, there is no parking, never has been parking, and we thus need a parking variance. By calculations of your staff, I think, Todd, you indicated we needed 15 parking spaces, and we have none. So that's why we're here. My first witness is Mr. Ludwig.
Please state your name, spell your last name.
Kurt Ludwig, Ludwig.
Mr. Ludwig, what is your occupation?
Registered.
Oh, did you get sworn in? I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Mrs. Ludwig, you've been before this board before, correct?
Correct.
Have your credentials changed since that last time you were before? We'll accept you.
Thank you.
Mr. Ludwig, you heard my opening comments, and you're familiar with the existing conditions of the subject property, and you prepared the plans here before the board this evening. Is that correct?
That's all correct.
All right. Can you briefly describe the building as it currently exists today?
Sure. Referring to A1.
And is that a color rendering of the plan set that we submitted in conjunction with this application?
Yes.
Okay, and that is sheet 1 of the set.
Correct. The building is at 121 French Street. It's an existing two-story building on partial basement construction. First floor recently was used as a church with residential use above on the second floor.
Okay, and do you know by examining the building what the occupancy load for people in the house of worship was?
It was approved for 160 occupants in the main room with 35 occupants in the conference room, an additional 35.
Okay. And the basement itself, was that also used actively by the church, can you tell?
Yes, it was.
And what took place down in the basement?
They had a conference facility down there.
Okay. And the second floor were apartments?
Correct. There was a residential use on the second floor.
Okay. And now, can you indicate to the board what we are proposing with respect to the property?
Sure. On A1, I have pictures of the existing building on the lower left corner. What we're proposing is to reface the exterior of the front of the building, add a new brick face, replace the stucco, add some metal awnings, replace the windows. The first floor would be opened up quite a bit to French Street. Right now it's all solid, no glass. It would be mostly glass facing French Street.
Okay, and the access to the apartments is where?
Currently, there's an alleyway. If I could go to the next board, I could show you. C2. A2? A2. So this is the first floor plan, second floor plan. French Street is here. There's an alleyway on the right side of the building facing it from French Street. And in that alleyway is an existing stairwell that goes up to the second floor. It appears that the stairway is actually attached to the neighboring structure, and it's quite in disrepair. So what we're proposing to do is to remove that stairwell and locate it inside the building.
There will be a separate entrance on the left side of the property as you're facing it from French Street to the apartments.
That's correct.
Okay, and you depict on A2 the retail space, and you show it as potential for two separate distinct retail units?
Yes.
Okay. And possibility, depending on the user, you can combine those into one retail space if necessary?
Correct.
Okay, is there also a basement in this building?
There is.
And what is the applicant proposing to do with the basement?
Proposing to use it only for storage and utility.
And the storage would be for the retail establishments, not for the residential uses, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, is it a full basement or a partial basement?
Partial basement.
All right. And we're not changing that at all?
Correct.
Can you describe what the apartments are going to be like?
Sure. Again, from French Street will be a new stairwell located on the interior of the building where you'll come up to a common lobby foyer. will be one 2-bedroom apartment facing French Street and one 3-bedroom apartment facing the back area, which is roof. Again, the second floor does not go over the entire building.
Okay, and access to both apartments is through that stairwell?
Correct.
Okay. Now, the facade that we proposed was what was recommended as a result of discussions with staff during our meetings, pre-application meetings in this matter?
That's correct.
Okay. How are we handling garbage?
Garbage for the dwelling units is proposed to be located in the alleyway. And depending on the use of the commercial retail, that could be used for garbage and recycling, or they could use the basement.
Okay. For the record, I do have prepared, and I don't have it in final form, a draft recycling plan prepared by Langen Engineering, which would address the recycling for the entire building with various scenarios. One scenario being that the retail space is non-restaurant, which obviously would require less garbage, less recycling, and the other is if it was a restaurant. The plan proposes that if it is a restaurant, that the garbage would be contained within the basement of the building, rolled down when it needed to be picked up. I will submit the entire report when we submit our compliance package. And again, right now, for the record, we do not have any user for the commercial space, so we can't tell you it's going to be a restaurant, retail store, whatever. It's, you know, we're going to clean the property up, remove all the remnants of the church, put the facade up, and then hopefully get a tenant. So, but I will submit a recycling plan that will deal with all the potential uses on that property. Mr. Ludwig, you reviewed the reports that were generated in conjunction with this application.
Yes, I have.
And we can comply with all of the comments contained therein. There's nothing that is problematic with respect to these reports?
No.
Okay. Mr. Bletcher did indicate that he had a concern about a potential restaurant use because of perhaps not having the ability to put a restaurant in there. Can this site be fitted for a restaurant?
Building code-wise, yes. We actually, based on some feedback from the city, created a chase for a possible kitchen exhaust hood, and obviously in the back it would be 1-story, so that could vent. But building code-wise, yes, it can definitely be fit out for a restaurant.
So I would just ask relief of the comment from Mr. Bletcher, which would require us to come back to the board if we wanted a restaurant use. I think as long as we're code compliant, I don't believe we need to come back since a restaurant is permitted within the zone.
Mr. Chair, our concern is that we've seen this before where sometimes we get the shell of the building and there's no particular tenants, and then tenants come in later, and then we get applications, building permit applications to put chillers and refrigeration equipment and all sorts of things on the property. Sometimes the forethought is not there to leave some space to put these things in an appropriate place, and then we've got them on roofs and we've got the screening and that sort of thing. So we were just trying to have a little foresight there as to how we would handle a likely tenant, what it would be and how we would handle it, all of the the utilitarian and the equipment stuff that might come along with the future restaurant. So I mean, I think the best thing to do would be for the applicant to address that to your satisfaction, and if you're amicable to not make that a condition, that's fine by me, as long as you're satisfied.
If it was going to be a restaurant, where would you put all the equipment?
Well, we have a basement that would be used for storage and utility, and you have a deep space here where you could have cooler walk-in boxes in the back and perhaps a kitchen area here. I could picture seating area here, and I don't know, we have a lot of glass. I don't know what the code is with the city, but we could have outdoor dining.
And you have room for exhaust if you have the kitchen?
Yes, this is a 1-story area here, so there's plenty of room for exhaust, and we created a chase for fresh air and exhaust, possibly.
And any mechanical equipment can be handled within the building?
Yes.
The chillers and everything can go inside the building in the basement?
Well, excuse me, some of the some units would need to be vented to the outside. There might be some small things that would have to be on the roof. perhaps, but walk-in boxes and so on would be located inside the building.
Well, the good news, as Mr. Fletcher brought up, is we've had some people, I don't know, right across the street, who have put restaurants in there, and the backyard, which was supposed to be for tenants or whatever, ends up being filled up with chillers and air conditioners and decompressors and things like that.
Right.
We want to try to avoid that situation. If you have a plan, show us.
How about a compromise saying that if any mechanical equipment, if this is a restaurant, again, we don't even know if it is, but if it is a restaurant and there's any mechanical equipment that is going to be proposed outside, then we'd have to come back to the board. Otherwise, we can, again, we could have a restaurant where it basically food is delivered. We don't do any food preparation inside the place. We may not have chillers or things of that nature, so why would we have to come back? But if we put any mechanical equipment outside, we would agree to come back to the board. This plan doesn't propose any loading, does it?
Correct.
And the ordinance requires that we provide a loading zone, correct?
Correct.
So we're asking for a variance from the requirements of loading.
Correct, yes.
Are you familiar with the area, and is there a loading zone anywhere in the vicinity of the subject property?
I am familiar. This is the next board, which I'll mark A3. This is French Street. This is our building here, and on the corner of, or on Harvey Street, there is a loading area that is designated no parking for loading only.
So if there were any deliveries to be made, the delivery vehicles can park on Harvey and just roll it, whatever they're delivering, past one storefront to our property.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Anyone have any questions? Seeing none, the next one.
Mr. O'Brien?
Please state your name, spell your last name.
Kevin O'Brien, O-B-R-I-E-N.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Thank you.
Mr. O'Brien, since last time you were before us, have your credentials changed at all?
They have not. I can produce my license upon request, Your Honor.
We'll accept it as an expert.
Thank you.
Mr. O'Brien, you're a licensed professional planner, just for the record.
I am.
Okay.
And not Mr. Lanford. I am.
Okay, and you're going to rely on one exhibit, which I have now marked as a 4 in your testimony, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And very briefly, you're familiar with the subject property, you're familiar with the zoning ordinance of the City of New Brunswick, the master plan of the City of New Brunswick, correct?
Yes to all the above.
Okay. While I hand out the photograph, which is an aerial Google map photograph of the subject property and the surrounding environs, you can start your testimony.
Chairman and board members, I'm acutely aware of the hour and the fact that I am the only person between you and that door. So I believe that if it pleases the board, I can go right to the proofs on the 2 variances. And if any additional information is necessary from my 12-page outline I worked for days on, I'll be happy to give it to you. Okay, we're asking for 2 variances. Number 1 is parking. The former church use needed approximately 46 spaces. None were provided. The current use needs 15 spaces. None are provided. You can see from the photograph in front of you, 121 French Street is in the urban core of New Brunswick. Between here and the train station, which is 1,500 feet, a block away to the hospital, 2,000 feet from the school, from Rutgers that is, it's in the midst of the urban core of downtown. No one who lives on French Street in an apartment expects to have a parking space. No one who goes to these stores expects to have a parking space, because they don't exist. They've never existed. You take street parking or you don't have parking. The people who move here have leases that tell them There's no parking in this lease. There's no parking in this apartment. So people are going to know that coming in here. And I think that based upon the fact that this is an area that the parking is just not expected, that this is a variance that I think that can be justified. As for the loading zone, you've heard testimony, the loading zone is around the corner. It's 50 feet away from the front door of this particular property. The loading zone on Harvey is approximately 85 feet long, and it can certainly hold, at the very least, a tractor trailer and a couple of box trucks if necessary. So I believe there's plenty of space for loading. In terms of the proofs, I believe that the bulk variances, these two bulk variances, can be granted on a C1 basis, which is a hardship based upon the peculiar properties of the lot. And the lot, which you have seen from the drawings, is completely covered by this building. There's a couple of stray feet around the edges, but there's no place to put a parking space. I believe that it can also be granted under C2, because under C2 we can show that the benefits outweigh the detriments, and there is language in the master plan which does talk about infill housing, talks about a wide range of housing and lifestyle choices, talks about offering access to convenience retail, proximity to transportation, and without going through them all item by item, I believe that this does meet the requirements of the master plan in contributing to the urban core of New Brunswick. It is also supported by the municipal land use law to secure safety, because this is going to be a brand new code compliant building, to provide sufficient space in appropriate locations, to promote a desirable visual environment. You've seen the architectural in the front. This is a vast improvement over what's there now, what's being proposed. There's no negative impact that I can identify, and I would submit for your consideration that I believe that this application can be granted without substantial detriment to the public good and without substantial impairment of the zone plan and zoning ordinance. I welcome any questions.
Just one quick question, Mr. O'Brien. Given the fact that there is no parking there, are there in fact municipal parking spaces or municipal lots in the immediate vicinity should a tenant need a car?
Yes. The parking authority, of course, has multiple garages throughout the downtown. If somebody wanted to bring a car here, they could.
Okay. And those parking decks are within walking distance of the subject property?
They are indeed.
Okay. And in discussing the matter with the client, we have no problem inserting in the lease clearly that there is no parking available as part of any tenancy for the residential tenants. Is that correct?
That would be wise for the incoming tenants, yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Anyone from the board have any questions? No.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, anyone else?
I have no additional witnesses, and just very briefly, I think if you saw the photographs and the drawings prepared by Mr. Ludwig, this building is rather unattractive at the present time, has been vacant. My client just purchased it. He's going to make an investment in the community by rehabbing it. I think it will be an upgrade. I think the city has done a good job in doing a lot of renovation or applicants along French Street. I think this is another new upgrade, which I think will be a benefit to the community. And I think Mr. O'Brien is right. There is little or no parking available to the residents of French Street, and that's the way it is, and this is no different than what's already there.
Anyone from the public wish to comment or have questions on this matter? Seeing none, close public portion. Any comments from the board? Go ahead.
Chairman, if you make a positive recommendation, suggest the following conditions. Compliance with the terms of the DNR engineering report dated December 16th. Submission of all necessary easements and or cross-access agreements for review and approval by the board attorney and the city engineer prior to filing the same. Payment of all water and sewer connection fees, pursuant to Title 1304 and 1308. Issuance of road opening permit from the city engineer if required. Compliance with the terms of the Big Mill Consulting Group report dated December 17th. Planning review escrow funded for all anticipated post-approval reviews, payment of any of the fees due to the city of Brunswick related to development or use of the project, payment of all outstanding taxes and water and sewer fees, submit architectural plans to comply with any changes required by the planning or engineering memos or plan amendments offered at the hearing, and that that the applicant will come back to the board if there are any outside mechanical equipment proposed for future times.
Future restaurant.
For what?
Future restaurant?
Restaurant.
Mr. Chairman, just one additional thing, just for clarity, I think just for the applicant's benefit, I think it should be noted in the record. The application is for bulk variances, but there was also a site plan waiver request. The application triggers your site plan ordinance, but their request was to have that waived. And that is the submission of all the site plan details that we would typically ask for. And that's because it's an existing building, it's being renovated and retrofitted. So we didn't have any objection to that, but technically, for their approval to be complete, you would just include that in your, if you have favorable site plan waiver.
Thank you. Do I have a motion?
Motion approved.
I'll second.
Evelyn Escona,
Yes.
Doug Sheehan,
Yes.
Peg Chester,
Yes.
John Zimmerman,
Yes.
Evan Adorno,
Yes.
Sue McElligott,
Yes.
John Cox.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
We just have one more matter to do. Approval of 2019 zoning board of adjustment meeting schedule.
I have a question on that. April meeting is the 15th. 29th. The 5th one.
The 5th one?
Yeah, it's, we came up with my class there, Easter Monday, so I'm going to the 5th.
Okay.
Good Friday.
But he means just because people are away. That's why you moved it for the rest of the week.
I don't recall why, but I came up with Easter Monday as being a holiday
It was
for
the
the
day
calendar,
after
so.
Easter, it would be the 4th Monday.
Yeah.
I mean, anyone have an objection?
Do you want to, we can move back to the 22nd?
You want to do the 22nd, you want to go to the 29th?
You can make a motion to amend it,
Yes.
just so we can publish a schedule for next year.
Right. Does anyone have any?
Yeah, the only other three other changes were May, because the 4th Monday, and December.
It probably should be noted as the 5th Monday, you know, the 3rd Monday, it's not the 4th.
Yeah, if you want to keep that date, we can note it as the 5th Monday for publication purposes, that's fine.
The thing is though, then if you do it on the 29th and you're doing the May one on the 20th, you're within 3 weeks, you're having 2 meetings.
It's up to you, you're on board, so you can approve your schedule, so.
Do you want to leave it as the 29th or you want to move it back to the 22nd? Leave it as the 29th.
To note it as the.
Just to note it as the 5th Monday of that month. Okay. Motion? Can I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
What he said.
No, motion to adjourn.
All in favor? Opposed?
That was good. Other matters of interest to the public?
Good evening, members of the board. Once again, Charles Prattville, New Brunswick. Just want to take a quick moment to tell the board that, I'm sure you know this, but you have some very big shoes to fill. I want to thank Mr. Patterson for his years of service. My understanding this will be his last meeting as the secretary to the board. And I just want to take a moment to say that we didn't always see eye to eye, but I certainly respect the work you've done and thank you for that work, and you've made your mark on the city. And just in my personal experience as one of the people who comes to these meetings a lot, Mr. Patterson's expertise and his questions and his statements at these meetings really helped me understand what was going on. And so I think that he deserves a round of applause. And wish him well.
This is Mr. Siegel's last meeting also, so he does most of all the hard work. I just get to sit here and sound smart and so forth. He does all the hard stuff, pushing all the paper around and making things get scheduled right and making the meetings appear smooth. So thanks for all of our work for the last 12 years.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
All in favor?